Hey everyone, how's your day going? Whether it's been good or rough, you're not alone. So sit back, relax, and let's step into the world of mystery together. My name is Mike Grayson, and if you had asked me a year ago, I would have told you I wasn't afraid of anything. I didn't believe in ghosts. I didn't flinch at horror movies. I was the guy who rolled his eyes when people talked about haunted houses. That was before I moved into my parents' old house. It's a two-story colonial home in a quiet Ohio town, the kind of place where everyone knows each other's names. After my parents passed, the house sat empty for nearly 2 years. My sister had already built a life for herself in California, so I was the one who ended up taking it over. First, it felt like a fresh start. The house was a little dusty, a little drafty, but nothing a few repairs couldn't fix. I told myself it was just a house, just walls, floors, and memories, but something about it never felt quite right. Started small. Sometimes, when I passed the basement door, I'd get the distinct feeling that someone was standing on the other side, listening. Other nights, when the house was completely silent, I swore I could hear faint noises coming from below. A soft rustling, like fabric moving, or something shifting in the dark. I told myself it was just the house settling. Old pipes, maybe even mice. Then one night I heard it. Knock, knock, knock. I was in the living room, half asleep in front of the TV, when I woke up to the sound. At first, I thought I had imagined it. I muted the screen and sat still, listening. A long silence. And then, knock, knock, knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I wasn't sure where it was coming from at first, until I realized. It was coming from directly beneath me, from the basement. My breath caught in my throat. I sat frozen on the couch, every muscle in my body tense. The knocking stopped, but for the first time since moving in, I felt something I couldn't explain. Not fear, not confusion, something worse. The unshakable feeling that I wasn't alone in that house, and that whatever was down there knew I was here. I didn't move for what felt like forever. The house was silent again, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. My ears strained, trying to pick up any sound, but the knocking was gone. Had I imagined it? No. I knew what I had heard. I sat there, gripping the couch, my breathing shallow. Something in my gut told me I didn't want to know what was waiting beneath me. But I also knew one thing for sure. Houses don't knock back. That night, sleep didn't come easy. I laid in bed, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet, but my mind wasn't. The sound replayed in my head over and over again. Knock, knock, knock. What was worse than the noise itself was the fact that it had come from directly beneath me. From the basement, the one place in this house I had never set foot in. I checked my phone. 3:12 a.m. Maybe it was all in my head. Maybe it was just an old house making old house noises. I closed my eyes. And then, knock, knock, knock. My breath caught in my throat. This time it was louder, and it was coming from right below my bed. I sat up so fast I nearly fell off the mattress. My heart pounded against my ribs as I swung my legs over the edge of the bed, trying to steady my breath. I listened. Silence. I stood up slowly, my feet barely making a sound against the wooden floor. I crept toward the bedroom door, opened it, and peeked out into the hallway. The house was dark. Everything was still, except knock, knock, knock came from downstairs, from behind the basement door. I hesitated for only a second before flipping on every light in the house. I wasn't about to investigate the dark, locked basement in the middle of the night. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table, my hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, waiting for the sun to rise. By the time morning came, I had convinced myself of one thing. I had to check the basement. I spent the better part of an hour searching the house until I finally found it. A rusty old key in a drawer full of junk, to fit perfectly into the lock. The door creaked open, revealing a staircase leading down into pure darkness. A musty, almost decayed smell drifted up. It was freezing down there, much colder than the rest of the house. I hesitated before turning on my phone's flashlight and stepping inside. The basement was exactly what I expected. Dusty, damp, and empty. Or at least that's what I thought. I swept my flashlight across the room, taking in old wooden shelves, cobwebbed furniture, and broken crates. Nothing unusual. Then I saw it. The scratches. They lined the far wall, deep and uneven, like someone had clawed at the concrete with bare hands. I stepped closer, running my fingers over the marks. The realization sent a chill through my body. These weren't old scratches. They were fresh, and they led straight to a wooden support beam, where something small and dark was wedged into the corner. A book. I reached down, picking up the dust-covered leather journal. The pages were yellowed and brittle, the handwriting inside frantic and messy. I flipped through it, scanning the entries. One page caught my eye, the last entry, scribbled in uneven handwriting. I am not a monster. Please, if anyone finds this, don't let me die down here. My hands tightened around the journal. A gust of cold air brushed past me. I froze. Somewhere in the basement, just beyond the reach of my flashlight, I heard it, a whisper, right next to my ear. Mike! I spun around, flashlight shaking. But there was no one there. Just the empty basement. Just the fresh scratches on the wall. Just the heavy, suffocating silence pressing down on me. I slammed the journal shut and bolted up the stairs, heart hammering, locking the door behind me the second I was back in the kitchen. I pressed my back against the wall, breathing hard. Something was down there, something that knew my name, and now it wasn't going to stop. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the basement door, my fingers gripping a cold cup of coffee. The sun was rising now, soft golden light slipping through the windows, but it did nothing to chase away the chill in my bones. I kept replaying the events of last night in my head. The knocking, the scratches on the basement walls, and worst of all, the whisper. I knew what I had heard. Something had said my name, and I was starting to believe I wasn't alone in this house. I forced myself to my feet. I had spent all night telling myself I wasn't afraid, that this was my house, that I wasn't going to let some weird noises and tricks of the mind push me out. But when I reached for the basement door handle, I hesitated, because something had changed. The door wouldn't open. I frowned, twisting the knob harder. It was stuck, like it had been bolted shut from the inside. That didn't make sense. I had locked it myself the night before, but only from this side. I pressed my ear to the wood. Silence. And then, knock, knock, knock. I staggered back, nearly knocking over my chair. It was different this time. The knocking wasn't coming from the basement. It was coming from directly behind me. I grabbed my phone and dialed my sister, my hands shaking so badly that I nearly dropped it. It rang. Once. Twice. Mike? What time is it? She sounded half asleep. I didn't care. Liz, listen to me, I whispered. Did Mom and Dad ever say anything about the basement? She paused. Too long. What? The basement, I repeated, my voice more frantic. Did they ever talk about it? Why it was locked? More silence. Then, in a voice that sent an icy wave of dread through me, she said, Mike, our house didn't have a basement. I gripped the phone tighter. My eyes darted to the door, the one I had just stood in front of, the one I had been inside. No, I whispered. That's not right. I was just down there. I saw Mike. Her voice was eerily calm now, like she was explaining something to a child. You need to leave that house. I felt lightheaded. I had been in the basement. I had felt the cold air, seen the scratches in the concrete, touched the journal left behind by whoever had been trapped down there. None of that could have been imagined, right? I turned, looking down the hallway, trying to make sense of it all. Then I saw it, a figure, standing just beyond the dim light, half hidden in the shadows. Tall, gaunt, too thin. Its head was tilted slightly, like it was watching me with an unnatural curiosity. My breath hitched. I tried to move. It did first. It didn't walk. It glided, straight toward me, I stumbled back, knocking over my coffee cup, heart pounding so hard it hurt. I blinked, and it was gone, just gone. But the air in the kitchen was different now, heavier, like something was still there, standing just out of sight, waiting for me to acknowledge it. The final knock. I grabbed my keys and bolted. I wasn't going to stay another second. I made it to the front door, my hand on the knob when knock, knock, knock. This time, it came from the other side of the front door. My fingers froze on the handle. Whatever was inside the house hadn't been trying to get out. It had been trying to keep something else from coming in. And suddenly, I had the sickening feeling that if I opened that door, I wouldn't be the one leaving this house. The knocking stopped, but the silence that followed was worse. I stood at the front door, fingers hovering over the knob, my breath caught in my throat. The air in the house felt thick, pressing against my chest, suffocating me. The moment stretched too long, an unnatural stillness wrapping itself around me. Then I heard it. "Mike, let me in." The voice was soft, almost gentle, but it wasn't right. It wasn't human, because it was my own voice. I stumbled backward, a wave of nausea twisting my stomach. The words had come from the other side of the door, but they didn't belong to me. It was like someone, or something, was mimicking me, distorting my voice into something hollow and unnatural. I clenched my fists, trying to keep my breath steady, but the walls of the house felt like they were closing in. Then something moved outside the window. A shadow, impossibly tall, impossibly thin. It passed by in a slow, gliding motion, the porch light barely illuminating its form. My body locked up, my mind screaming at me to move, but I was frozen. Whatever was out there wasn't trying to get in. It was waiting for me to come out. The realization sent ice through my veins. I forced my legs to move, backing away from the door, reaching for my phone. I dialed 911, my fingers shaking so badly I could barely hit the numbers. It rang once, twice, then the power went out. The kitchen light flickered once and died. The air conditioning cut off. The low hum of the refrigerator disappeared. Even my phone screen went black, as if something had drained the life from the entire house in an instant. And then I wasn't alone. A slow, raspy breath filled the room behind me. I didn't turn around. Couldn't. Every muscle in my body locked up as the sound grew closer, brushing against my ear, as if something was leaning in to whisper to me. "Mike!" I bolted. I ran through the darkness, slamming into walls, knocking over chairs, my hands fumbling through the air until I reached the hallway. The floorboards groaned beneath my feet as I pushed forward, but then I skidded to a stop. The basement door was open. It had been locked. I knew it had been locked, but now it was slightly ajar, just enough to reveal a sliver of pure darkness. The air coming from within was wrong. Colder than the rest of the house, thick with the scent of damp wood and something else, something rotting. And then, in the corner of my eye, something moved in the shadows. I didn't wait. I turned and sprinted for the front door. The moment I reached for the handle, knock, 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 from the other side, I stumbled back, a sharp gasp escaping my lips. The knock wasn't desperate. It wasn't aggressive. It was patient. And then a whisper. "Mike, open the door." I forced myself to breathe. I could feel something standing inches away, just beyond the wood, listening, smiling. My pulse pounded in my ears as I grabbed my keys off the counter, my hands slick with sweat. I threw the door open and ran. The air outside was suffocating, thick with humidity, but I didn't care. I sprinted straight to my car, yanking the door open and diving inside. My fingers fumbled with the keys, jamming one into the ignition. Click, click, click. The engine wouldn't start. I twisted the key again, harder. Click, click, click. A tremor of panic shot through me. I slammed my hand against the dashboard, my breathing ragged, and then something stepped out of the house. My eyes locked onto the rearview mirror, and my stomach dropped. A figure stood at the edge of the driveway. Tall, too tall. Its arms hung low, its fingers stretching too long. Its body hunched as if it wasn't used to standing upright. and it had no face, just smooth, pale skin where its eyes, nose, and mouth should have been. But I could feel it looking at me. I turned the key one last time. The engine roared to life. I slammed my foot on the gas, the tires screeching as I shot forward, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I didn't look back. I didn't need to, because even over the roar of the engine, over the pounding of my own heart, I could still hear it. The voice, soft, laughing, whispering my name. And as I sped down the road, one final thought crept into my mind, filling me with dread. I had left the house, but somehow I knew the house hadn't let me go. The road stretched ahead in the darkness, a narrow strip of asphalt cutting through the endless trees. My hands gripped the wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The car's engine hummed beneath me, the only sound in the suffocating quiet of the night. I had escaped. Or at least, I thought I had. But as the miles passed, a terrible realization crept into my mind, coiling around my thoughts like a vice. Something was wrong. The road, it never ended. I kept driving, but no matter how far I went, the scenery remained the same. The same twisted trees, the same broken road signs, the same dark nothingness stretching out in every direction. My pulse pounded in my ears. Hadn't I passed the crooked fence before? I glanced at the clock on the dashboard. 2:13 a.m. That wasn't possible. It had been 2:13 a.m. when I left the house. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I gritted my teeth and pressed harder on the gas pedal. I just needed to get to a gas station, a diner, somewhere with lights, somewhere real. And then, something stepped onto the road. A dark, faceless figure. I slammed the brakes, the tires screaming against the pavement. My breath caught in my throat as the figure stood still, motionless, waiting. And then, it disappeared. Not like it ran. Not like it moved. Just gone. The car skidded to a stop, my hands shaking against the wheel. My breath came in short, panicked bursts. I turned, glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see it standing right behind me. But there was nothing. Only the empty road. And yet I knew I had seen it before. I swallowed hard and forced myself to drive forward, faster this time, my heart hammering with every mile. But the dread only deepened. The trees felt closer now, their twisted branches reaching toward the car like skeletal hands. And then, up ahead, lights? A gas station. My body sagged with relief. I pulled into the lot, tires crunching against the gravel. The neon sign flickered overhead, buzzing faintly in the still night air. A single car sat parked near the entrance, dark and empty. I climbed out, my legs still unsteady, my breath shaky. The cool night air did little to calm me. I just needed to see people, hear voices, prove to myself that I was really here. I stepped toward the glass doors and stopped. My reflection stared back at me, but behind me, just outside the glow of the lights, a tall, thin figure stood watching. I spun around, my stomach twisting into knots. Nothing. The parking lot was empty. Just my car. Just the quiet hum of the neon sign. I turned back to the store, my fingers trembling as I reached for the door handle. But my relief curdled into fear the moment I looked inside. The store was empty. Not just quiet. Not just abandoned. Completely empty, like no one had stepped foot inside for years. A sickening wave of dread rolled over me. I wasn't supposed to leave, because I never had. The truth crashed down on me, slow and suffocating. My pulse pounded as I turned back toward the highway. And there at the very edge of the road, standing in the distance, the house was waiting, exactly as I had left it, like I had never left at all. I sat in my car, staring at the impossible. The house was there, standing at the end of the road exactly where I had left it. It shouldn't be here. I had driven miles away. I had seen the gas station, the empty highway, the endless stretch of road leading away from this place. And yet, here it was, waiting. A pressure built in my chest, a heavy, suffocating weight that told me something was terribly, terribly wrong. I wasn't free. I never had been. The house had let me believe I was escaping, let me feel the false relief of the open road, only to pull me back like a fish on a hook. Because no matter where I went, it was always going to bring me home. I turned off the car. The headlights dimmed, leaving only the faint glow of the porch light in the distance. The front door was open. Not fully, just enough for me to see inside. Just enough to let the darkness spill out like an open wound. Something in my gut screamed at me to run. But where would I go? I reached for my phone, hoping, praying that it had somehow come back to life. Nothing. The screen remained black, as if the battery had been drained completely dry. It was no use. I had to go back. Not because I wanted to, but because the house was waiting for me. I stepped out of the car, my legs weak, my breath shallow. The air was thick here, heavier than it should be, charged with something unseen. The trees surrounding the house felt closer, their twisted branches stretching toward the roof like grasping fingers. I took a step forward. The porch light flickered. Another step. The air around me grew warmer, as if the house itself was reacting to my presence, as if it could feel me coming closer. The front door stood ajar, a yawning black void leading into the unknown. I didn't want to go inside, but I had no choice. I climbed the porch steps, each one groaning beneath my weight. The house was breathing. I could feel it in the walls, in the floorboards beneath me. It was alive, and it had been waiting for me to return. I stepped inside. The second I crossed the threshold, the door behind me slammed shut. The air shifted, a heavy stillness settling over the house like a thick blanket. Everything was wrong. The house was the same, but it wasn't. The walls looked taller, the shadows stretched longer, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and something rotten. And then I heard it. A slow, deliberate creak from the end of the hallway. The basement door. It had been closed when I left. Now it was wide open. A heavy silence filled the air, the kind that presses into your skull, makes it hard to think, hard to breathe. I knew what I had to do. I had always known. Whatever this was, whatever had been pulling me back, the answer was waiting for me down there. In the dark. In the place I was never supposed to go. My feet moved on their own. Step by step, I walked toward the basement. And just before I reached the top of the stairs, I heard something move below. Not a shuffle. Not a creak. A breath. Long, slow. Waiting. A whisper curled up from the darkness. You finally understand. The door behind me slammed shut, and I stepped forward. The moment I stepped onto the basement floor, the door above slammed shut. A deep, heavy silence settled around me, pressing against my skin like a thick fog. The air down here was wrong, thicker, heavier, charged with something unseen. The musty scent of damp wood and old concrete clung to every breath I took. I raised my phone, the flashlight beam cutting through the dense darkness. Something moved in the farthest corner of the basement. Not a rat. Not a shifting shadow. Something breathing. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to take a step forward. The floor beneath me felt softer than it should have, like something was shifting just beneath the surface. Then the voice came. You finally understand, don't you? I froze. It wasn't coming from the walls. It wasn't coming from the darkness. It was coming from right behind me. I turned slowly, and standing there, half-shrouded in the shadows, was me. It looked exactly like me. Same face. Same clothes. Same terrified expression, except for the eyes. They were wrong. Too dark. Too deep. Too empty. It smiled. You've been here before, Mike. I shook my head. No, that wasn't possible. I had only just come back. I had been fighting to leave. But the thing in front of me only tilted its head, its grin stretching wider. You never left. The words hit like a cold wave crashing over me. Suddenly, memories I didn't recognize flooded my mind, fragments of moments that didn't belong to me, yet they felt real. Me walking through the house, time slipping away in pieces. Me staring into the basement night after night, never remembering how long I had been there. Me seeing someone else move in. Me watching from the basement as they explored my home. A sharp pain lanced through my skull, and I stumbled back, my breath coming in ragged gasps. No, this wasn't real. It couldn't be real, but the thing that wore my face only watched, unblinking. You've been here a long, long time. The shadows around it began to shift. To pull. To consume. And suddenly I understood. I hadn't returned to the house. I had never left. The basement walls groaned, the sound of something ancient waking from its slumber. The air vibrated, a low, unnatural hum seeping through the cracks in the floor. And then footsteps. Slow. Careful. Hesitant. Coming from the front door. Someone was inside the house. A new tenant. A new victim. The thing wearing my face took a step back, melting into the walls, becoming part of the pulsing darkness. Don't worry, it whispered. You won't be alone for long. The last thing I saw before everything collapsed into blackness was the basement door creaking open again, welcoming someone new. Some houses aren't haunted. Some houses are alive. They pull people in. They whisper to them. They rewrite them. If you ever feel something watching you in an empty room, if you ever hear a knock from somewhere no one should be, if you ever find a door that wasn't there before, leave. Don't ask questions. Don't look back. Because some places don't just trap people. They become them. And once you belong to the house, you never leave.